I don't even know your name yet, she murmured, her lips close to his ear as the bass from the nightclub reverberated around them. The evening had been a blur of movement and sound, and now she found herself locked in a flirtation that felt both dangerous and thrilling. But you don't care, do you? She continued, her breath warm against his skin. They were standing close, the kind of closeness that felt intimate, almost too intimate for strangers, but she liked it. The thrill of the unknown, the excitement of a new adventure. This was what she had been craving for so long. He smiled, his fingers casually brushing a strand of hair from her face. Names are just details, he said smoothly. What matters is the moment, and right now the moment is perfect. She chuckled softly, the sound barely audible over the pounding music. You're certainly confident and hot, she replied, intrigued by his demeanor. I like that. She took a sip of her drink, her eyes never leaving his. She felt a rush of excitement, a sharp contrast to the boredom she had felt in her life recently. Confidence is easy when you're on top of the world, he said, glancing around the room. The flashing lights reflected in his eyes, making them seem to sparkle. And right now, the world is ours. Her thoughts drifted back to her life at home, where things had become so dull. Her husband, Andy, had once been exciting, passionate even. But over the years, their relationship had cooled. Conversations had turned to routine, and the spark that once lit up their marriage had dimmed. Andy was predictable now. He came home at the same time every night, ate the same meals, watched the same shows. She had started to feel trapped, longing for something more, something that made her feel alive again. That's why she had gone out tonight. Andy was working late again, a business trip, he'd said, and she had decided to take the opportunity to let loose. The nightclub was a world away from the life she shared with Andy. Here, no one knew her. Here, she could be anyone she wanted to be. She had noticed the man the moment he entered the club. He moved with a kind of effortless grace, commanding attention without even trying. She watched as women turned their heads to look at him, and when their eyes met across the room, she felt a jolt of electricity. She hadn't planned on flirting, not really, but there was something about him that drew her in. It started innocently enough, a glance here, a smile there. But before long, she found herself gravitating toward him, as if some invisible force was pulling them together. So, do you have a name, or should I keep calling you Mr. Confidence? She teased, her voice light as she raised an eyebrow. Marcus, he replied, his smile widening. And you? Angela, she said, extending her hand, half joking. He took it, his grip firm and warm. The touch lingered, and she found herself enjoying the sensation. So Angela, Marcus said, his tone playful. What brings a beautiful woman like you out to a place like this all alone? Angela shrugged, trying to play it cool. Just needed a change of scenery, she said. Life's been a little too predictable lately. Predictable can be good, Marcus said, taking a sip of his drink. But too much of it can be suffocating, right? Exactly, Angela replied, a little surprised at how easily he seemed to understand her. I just needed a night to break free, you know? To feel something different. Marcus nodded, his eyes studying her. And did you find what you were looking for? Maybe, she said, her lips curving into a smile. But the night's still young. As they talked, Angela found herself drawn deeper into his world. Marcus was confident, but not in the way most men were. He didn't need to brag or show off, he just was, and that was enough. He spoke about his travels, the places he had seen, the people he had met. Every word painted a picture of a life full of excitement and adventure, so different from her own. When Marcus suggested they dance, Angela didn't hesitate. They moved to the rhythm of the music, their bodies close, the chemistry between them undeniable. It was exhilarating, a far cry from the last time she and Andy had danced, which she couldn't even remember. After a few songs, they returned to the bar, their faces flushed with the heat of the dance floor. You're full of surprises, Marcus, Angela said, her voice light, but there was something serious in her eyes. You're not like anyone I've met before. I could say the same about you, Marcus replied, his gaze intense. There's something about you, Angela. Something different. His words sent a thrill through her. For so long, she had felt invisible, just another part of the background in her own life. But here, in this moment, she felt seen, I have a villa in Italy, Marcus said suddenly, leaning in close as if sharing a secret. How about we escape this city and live like kings and queens? Angela's heart skipped a beat. Italy? It was like something out of a movie. The idea of leaving everything behind, of starting over in a place so far removed from her everyday life, was intoxicating. When do we leave? She asked, not even bothering to hide the excitement in her voice. Tomorrow, Marcus replied, his grin widening. Pack your bags. We're going on an adventure. The reality of what she was about to do began to sink in, but it only made her more determined. She had been drifting for so long, but now, for the first time in years, she felt alive. And he would never understand. He was too rooted in his routines, too comfortable with the life they had built together. But Angela was ready to take a risk, to seize the chance at something new, something exciting. She didn't go home that night. Instead, she and Marcus spent the rest of the evening in a hotel room, losing themselves in the moment. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that they finally left, stepping out into the cool night air. As they walked down the empty street, Angela felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in years. The decision had already been made, and there was no turning back. Tomorrow, she would pack her bags, leave a note for Andy, and disappear into the unknown with Marcus. You're sure about this? Marcus asked as they reached the corner where they would part ways for the night. I've never been more sure of anything, Angela replied, her eyes shining with anticipation. Marcus smiled, leaning in to kiss her softly on the lips. Tomorrow, then, he said as he pulled back. We'll start a new life together. As Angela watched him walk away, she couldn't help but smile. The old life she was leaving behind already felt like a distant memory, and tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. The flight to Italy was a blur, the rush of excitement making everything seem surreal. Angela had barely had time to think, to process what she was doing. All she knew was that she was finally free, free from the monotony of her life, free from Andy, free to chase something new. Marcus, her mysterious and charming companion, had become her escape, her ticket to a life she had only ever dreamed of. As the plane touched down in Rome, Angela felt a thrill run through her. The city was vibrant, the air thick with the scent of adventure. She clung to Marcus's arm as they navigated the busy airport, his presence reassuring amidst the chaos. Ready for the time of your life? Marcus asked, flashing her a grin as they stepped into the bright Italian sunshine. More than ready, Angela replied, her heart pounding with anticipation. Marcus was the perfect guide. He whisked her away in a sleek black car, pointing out the sights as they drove through the city. The ancient ruins, the bustling piazzas, the winding streets, all of it felt like stepping into a dream. Angela watched the city unfold before her eyes, each new sight adding to the growing sense of euphoria that had taken hold of her. Their first stop was a hidden restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. It was the kind of place she never would have found on her own, a small, intimate spot where the food was rich and the wine flowed freely. Marcus ordered in perfect Italian, impressing her with his ease and confidence. This is amazing, Angela said as she sipped her wine, the view of the city spread out before them. I can't believe we're really here. Believe it, Marcus replied, raising his glass to hers. To new beginnings. They spent the next few days exploring Rome, Marcus guiding her through the city's labyrinth of history and culture. They visited the Colosseum, the Vatican, the Spanish Steps. Everywhere they went, Marcus seemed to have a story, a connection, a way to make Angela feel like she was part of something exclusive and extraordinary. But it wasn't just the sightseeing that captivated her. It was the way Marcus made her feel. He was attentive, charming, always saying the right thing at the right time. With him, Angela felt alive, desired, like the center of the universe. It was everything she had been missing in her life with Andy, and more. Yet, as the days passed, Angela began to notice small cracks in the facade. Marcus was constantly on his phone, having hushed conversations in the corner of their hotel room or stepping out onto the balcony to talk. His expression would darken during these calls, a stark contrast to the carefree persona he projected around her. Is everything okay? Angela asked one evening as they dined in a lavish restaurant overlooking the city. The lights of Rome sparkled below them, but Angela couldn't shake the growing unease that had settled in her stomach. Marcus looked up from his phone, forcing a smile. "Of course, sweetie," he said, slipping the device into his pocket. "You're being paranoid, babe. We're in Italy. Enjoy it." Angela tried to follow his advice. She pushed aside her concerns, convincing herself that she was overreacting. After all, Marcus had given her no reason to doubt him. He had brought her to Italy, shown her the time of her life. What could possibly be wrong? But the unease only grew. Marcus became more distant, his calls more frequent and secretive. When Angela asked about his business, he brushed her off with vague answers, assuring her that everything was fine. Yet, the way his eyes darted around the room, the tension in his shoulders, it all told a different story. Then, one morning, Angela woke up to find Marcus gone. She sat up in bed, blinking in the early morning light. His side of the bed was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. At first, she thought he had gone out for a walk, or maybe to get coffee. But as she looked around the room, she noticed something that sent a chill down her spine. His things were gone. The suitcase that had been sitting by the door was missing, along with his clothes and personal items. Angela's heart began to race. She scrambled out of bed, searching the room for any sign of him. But there was nothing. No note, no message, just the empty space where Marcus's belongings had been. Panicking, she grabbed her phone and tried calling him, but the call went straight to voicemail. She tried again and again, each time growing more frantic. Finally, she checked the nightstand, hoping for a clue, and found a single piece of paper folded neatly under a book. With trembling hands, she unfolded the note. "I had to leave. Don't try to find me." The words were like a punch to the gut. Angela stared at the note, her mind reeling. What did this mean? Where had he gone? Why had he left her? She rushed to her suitcase, rifling through her belongings for her wallet. She needed to get home to figure out what was happening. But when she opened her wallet, her heart sank even further. Her credit cards were missing. Desperately, she tried to log into her bank account on her phone, but the account had been drained. Marcus had taken everything. Angela felt the room spin around her. She was alone in a foreign country, with no money, no way to contact anyone, and no idea what to do next. The fantasy she had been living in shattered in an instant, leaving her with nothing but the cold, hard reality of her situation. She sank to the floor, her mind racing. How had this happened? How had she been so blind, so naive? The charming man who had swept her off her feet had turned out to be nothing more than a con artist, and now she was paying the price. But as the initial shock began to wear off, something else took its place, a steely resolve. She had made a mistake, but she wasn't going to let it destroy her. She would find a way out of this. She would survive, no matter what it took. With that thought in mind, Angela slowly stood up, crumpling the note in her hand. She didn't know what she was going to do next, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let Marcus get away with this. The adventure was over. Now it was time to fight back. Angela sat in the airport, numb as she booked the earliest flight back home. Her sister helped her to get the air ticket. She had nothing left in Italy. Her thoughts raced, bouncing between fear, regret, and anger. How had she been so foolish to trust Marcus? She had given up everything. Her husband, her life, her stability, for a man who had vanished without a trace, leaving her stranded and penniless. The flight home felt endless, a purgatory where she had too much time to think. She replayed every moment with Marcus, trying to pinpoint when things had started to go wrong. But it was too late for that. The reality was, she had no choice but to return to the life she had so recklessly abandoned. The life she had thought she didn't want. As the plane touched down, Angela took a deep breath, trying to steel herself for what was to come. She had no idea how Andy would react to seeing her again, or if he would even let her back in. But she had to try. She had no one else. The taxi ride to her old home was tense. Angela stared out the window, watching familiar streets pass by, each one tugging at memories she wasn't sure she was ready to face. When the car finally pulled up to her house, she hesitated, staring at the place she used to call home. It looked the same, but something was different. The garden was more tended to. The lights in the windows felt warmer. She felt like an intruder in her own life. She stepped out of the car, her legs shaky as she approached the front door. Her hand trembled as she reached for her keys, trying to steady herself. She slipped the key into the lock, only to find that it didn't fit. Angela's heart dropped. Panic surged through her as she tried again, jiggling the key, but it was useless. Her hand hovered over the doorbell. She pressed it, her mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe Andy had changed the locks out of precaution. Maybe. The door opened, cutting off her thoughts. There stood Andy, looking healthier, more confident than when she'd left him. But it wasn't just him. Beside him was a young woman, stunning, with a glow of contentment that made Angela's stomach churn. The woman's hand rested casually on Andy's arm, a gesture of ownership. "Hey, gold digger bitch, what are you doing here?" Andy's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. Angela opened her mouth, but words failed her. I came home." She finally managed, her voice a shaky whisper. She looked at the woman, then back at Andy. "Who is she?" Andy laughed, a sound so cold it sent a shiver down her spine. "This is my wife. You remember what that's like, right?" He stepped aside, letting the reality of his words sink in. "You left, remember? So I replaced you, and I think I upgraded." Angela's mind reeled. She had expected anger, maybe even hatred, but not this. "But you can't just throw me out." "This is my home," she cried, desperation creeping into her voice. "Not anymore," Andy said, his smile widening with a cruel satisfaction. "You see, you were just a placeholder until I found someone better. And I did. So why don't you go back to your rich lover?" "Oh wait, you can't, can you?" The woman beside him chuckled, her eyes gleaming with amusement. "Don't feel too bad," she said, her voice laced with mockery. "You're just not worth it." Angela's chest tightened as she fought back tears. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I have nowhere else to go." Andy's expression remained unchanged, his voice cold and detached. "Not my problem," he said, stepping back into the house. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a honeymoon to plan. Italy, I think. It's beautiful this time of year." He didn't wait for a response. With a final, dismissive glance, he slammed the door in her face. Angela stood there, frozen, staring at the door that had once been hers. The life she had thought she was running toward had crumbled to dust, and the life she had left behind was no longer hers. She was alone, defeated, standing on a doorstep that no longer welcomed her. She turned away, her mind blank, her feet moving on autopilot as she walked down the path. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing: she couldn't stay here. Angela refused to leave. The shock of being turned away, of seeing her husband with another woman, fueled her desperation. She camped out on the doorstep, ignoring the cold, hunger, and the discomfort that gnawed at her. Every morning, she would rise as Andy left for work, and every night, she would watch as he returned, always with that woman by his side. The first few days, she knocked on the door, pleading with him to let her back in to talk to her. "Andy, please," she would cry out. "Just give me a chance to explain. I made a mistake. We can fix this." But Andy would merely glance at her, his expression one of cold indifference. "You need to leave, Angela, like you did," he'd say firmly before shutting the door in her face. The woman, his new wife, would often stand just behind him, watching the exchange with a satisfied smirk. Her presence only deepened Angela's humiliation. As days turned into weeks, Angela's pleas turned into bitter resentment. She began to mutter under her breath, her words laced with anger and spite. "He'll come around," she whispered to herself. "He has to. This woman doesn't deserve him." Her persistence was relentless. She sat on the doorstep, ignoring the curious glances of neighbors and the occasional comment about how she was losing it. The shame of what she was doing barely registered anymore. She had nowhere else to go, and the thought of being completely alone terrified her more than anything. One morning, as Andy stepped over her on his way to work, he looked down at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Just go, Angela," he said flatly, adjusting his tie. "You're embarrassing yourself. This isn't going to change anything." She looked up at him, her eyes wild. "You can't just throw me away, Andy. We were married. We made vows. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" He sighed, his patience clearly wearing thin. "You broke those vows when you left with him," he replied, his voice cold. "Now it's time for you to face the consequences. This isn't your home anymore." Angela watched him walk away, her mind spiraling into darker thoughts. The betrayal cut deep, and the more she dwelled on it, the more the anger consumed her. Every time she saw Andy and his new wife together, the anger grew, festering into something dangerous. She started to plot, to scheme, her thoughts centering on one thing: revenge. She began to observe them from the shadows, taking note of their routines. She watched as they left for work, as they returned in the evenings, as they laughed together over dinner, their lives seemingly perfect. It made her blood boil. "You took everything from me," she muttered, her hands clenched into fists. "But I'll take it all back. You'll see." The more she watched, the more she convinced herself that Andy was still hers, that this new woman had stolen him from her. The resentment twisted into a resolve to reclaim what she believed was rightfully hers. She waited, biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Then, one night, when the house was dark and silent, Angela decided it was time. She knew their routine well enough by now. They would be asleep, unaware of the danger lurking just outside their door. She took a deep breath, steeling herself as she picked the lock, slipping into the house she once called home. The house was eerily quiet as she moved through the halls, her footsteps silent on the carpet. She made her way to the bedroom, her heart pounding with anticipation. She could see the outline of their bodies beneath the covers, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to her presence. A surge of rage shot through her, and she pulled out the knife she had taken from the kitchen. She stood over them, her grip tightening on the handle. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She wanted to hurt them, to make them feel the pain she had felt. "You ruined everything," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You took everything from me." But as she raised the knife, something inside her faltered. Her hand trembled, the blade hovering in the air. The rage that had driven her to this point suddenly seemed to drain away, replaced by a crushing wave of despair. She couldn't do it. She couldn't go through with it. The knife slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor. Angela collapsed beside the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. "I can't," she whimpered, her voice barely audible. "I can't do this. I'm nothing. I have nothing." The noise woke Andy, and he bolted upright, his eyes widening in shock as he saw her on the floor. "Angela? What the hell are you doing here?" he shouted, his voice thick with anger and confusion. He got out of bed, grabbing her by the arm and yanking her to her feet. "Are you insane?" he demanded, shaking her. "What were you planning to do? Kill us in our sleep? Have you completely lost your mind?" But Angela could only cry, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. She had lost everything: her husband, her lover, her dignity. And now, she had nothing left. She was a shell of the woman she once was, broken beyond repair. Andy let go of her, disgusted. "You need help, Angela," he said, his voice cold and final. "You can't stay here. You need to leave from my house, right now." But Angela didn't move. She couldn't. She was trapped in her own misery, her own madness, and there was no escape. The arrest was swift, as if the world had been waiting for Angela to break completely. The police arrived, their sirens piercing the quiet night as neighbors peered from behind curtains, watching her being led away in handcuffs. Her mind was fractured, her grip on reality slipping as she was placed in the back of the squad car. The house that was once hers, now someone else's sanctuary, disappeared from view as they drove away. The psychiatric hospital became her new home, a sterile, colorless place that mirrored the emptiness she felt inside. Days blurred together into a fog of medication, therapy sessions, and hollow conversations with doctors who seemed to see right through her. Each session was the same: questions about her state of mind, discussions of her past, but never any real answers. Angela had become a shadow of herself, a woman who had lost everything, clinging to the last threads of sanity. One day, months into her stay, Angela was told she had a visitor. She was numb to the world around her, so she barely registered the announcement. But when she entered the visiting room, and her eyes fell on the familiar face, her breath caught in her throat. It was Andy, her husband, the man she had once loved, the man she had betrayed, and the man who had ultimately broken her. He looked different, worn down by time, and perhaps by the weight of what had transpired. His hair was grayer, his posture less confident. As she approached, Angela noticed a sadness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice devoid of emotion. She wasn't sure she had any left to give. Andy hesitated before answering, as if choosing his words carefully. "I came to see if you're okay," he said, his tone softer than she remembered. "I've been thinking about you, about everything that happened." Angela let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Thinking about me? Or about what I did to you? What I did to us?" Andy sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Both, I guess," he admitted, his gaze dropping to the floor. "But mostly I've been thinking about how we ended up here. How it all fell apart." Angela looked away, staring out the window at the bleak courtyard below. "It doesn't matter anymore," she murmured. "Nothing does." There was a long silence between them, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. Andy finally sat down in the chair opposite her, leaning forward as if he could somehow bridge the chasm that had grown between them. "I want to help you, Angela," he said, his voice almost pleading. "I want to get you out of here. Help you start over." Angela turned to face him, searching his face for any sign of deception, any hint that this was just another way to hurt her. "Why?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "After everything that's happened, after what I did to you, why would you want to help me?" Andy's eyes softened, and he leaned back in his chair, as if the truth was too heavy to carry any longer. "Because," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I still care about you. Despite everything, I can't just leave you like this. I want to make things right somehow." Angela's heart tightened at his words, but she quickly pushed the feeling away. She had been hurt too deeply, her trust shattered beyond repair. "Make things right?" she echoed, a hint of disbelief in her tone. "Andy, there's nothing left to fix. We're broken, and there's no putting us back together." Andy looked pained, as if her words had struck him harder than he'd expected. "Maybe you're right," he conceded. "But that doesn't mean I can just walk away. I don't want to see you suffer like this, Angela. Not anymore." Angela turned back to the window, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to believe him, to reach out and take the lifeline he was offering. But another part of her, the part that had been betrayed and humiliated, refused to trust him or anyone else again. "It's too late," she said softly, her voice breaking slightly. "It's all too late." And he didn't respond right away. He simply sat there, his expression a mixture of sadness and resignation. After what felt like an eternity, he stood up, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Angela," he said, his voice filled with genuine regret. "I really am." She didn't turn to look at him, didn't acknowledge his touch. She just closed her eyes, blocking out the world around her, including him. "Goodbye, Andy," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Andy lingered for a moment, as if he wanted to say more, but he eventually turned and left the room without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Angela alone once more in the sterile silence of the hospital. But as the minutes ticked by, Angela couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Andy's visit had stirred something within her, a spark of defiance, of anger that hadn't been extinguished by her time here. She wasn't done yet. She couldn't be. "Maybe it's not too late," she murmured to herself, a new determination hardening her resolve. "Maybe there's still a way to make things right, or at least make them pay." The thought lingered, growing stronger with each passing day. As she lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, a plan began to take shape in her mind. A plan for redemption, or maybe for revenge. Either way, Angela knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to be forgotten. Not yet. When Angela was finally released from the psychiatric hospital, the world outside felt alien. The colors were muted, the sounds distant, as if she were watching everything from behind a glass wall. She had lost everything, her husband, her lover, her sanity, but she was still breathing, still moving. And that was enough. She had a purpose now, something to anchor her fractured mind. She would take back what was hers. Her first stop was the house. The place that had once been her home was now just a memory, its walls filled with the laughter of another woman. But when she arrived, the house stood empty, the windows dark. A for sale sign swayed in the front yard. Andy and his new wife had moved on, leaving nothing behind but the ghost of a life Angela could no longer claim. Angela walked up the driveway, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She tried the door, and to her surprise, it swung open. The house was barren, stripped of all furniture and personal touches. But as she wandered through the empty rooms, she could still see the life that had once been there, her life. The echoes of conversations, the warmth of family dinners, the fights, the love, all of it lingered in the air like a fading scent. She stood in the middle of the living room, looking around at the bare walls. This was where it had all begun to unravel, where she had made the choice that had led to her downfall. But Angela wasn't here to dwell on the past. She was here to reclaim her future. They thought they could just replace me, she whispered to herself, her voice steady. They thought I would just disappear. But they were wrong. Angela had spent months in the hospital, piecing together a plan, a way to turn the tables. She had contacts, people who owed her favors, people who could help her find Andy and his new wife. And when she found them, she would show them that they hadn't won. Not yet. She left the house and drove to the last place she knew they'd been. It was a small town a few hours away, where Andy's job had taken him. As she pulled up to the address she'd been given, she felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. The house was modest, with a well-tended garden and a picket fence. She could see shadows moving inside, the faint hum of a television drifting through the open windows. Angela parked a little way down the street, watching, waiting. She didn't need to rush. This was only the beginning. As the sun set and the lights inside the house flickered on, Angela's lips curled into a cold smile. The game's far from over, she murmured, her eyes never leaving the house. And this time, I'm going to win. She sat there for hours, hidden in the shadows, plotting her next move. The darkness around her grew, but inside, a spark had been reignited. Angela was no longer a broken woman. She was a woman with nothing left to lose, and that made her more dangerous than ever before.